Welcome to the We Fucking Love Startups podcast. I'm your host, Troy Hammond, and on today's episode, we're chatting with Nick Houldsworth. Nick is was the head of ecosystem at Xero, and before that, chief marketing officer at Vend, where I worked with him. There was a big famous F-bomb gate that we talk about, which is essentially where he wrote a swear word and a job ad and then threw me under the bus and said that I wrote it because my name was on the job ad. So I'm going to get him back on the podcast about this. We talk about his journey, and we talk about his journey from being like an early stage startup where he was employee number one at Vend and how he got into that role, and then how he took that role and created that role into chief marketing officer. And then he realized that he wanted to go and work at a bigger company and learn the next scale up, and what he learned at Xero and what he didn't like about Xero and what the hell is he going to do now. And so, yeah, really fascinating conversation. I love chatting with Nick. It was good to chat over a whiskey. It was always good to see old friends. And so I hope you enjoyed this one as much as I enjoyed chatting with Nick and potentially the whiskey.
Kia ora. Thanks for tuning into the We Fucking Love Startups podcast, brought to you by Talent Army.
We're talking about this before. I feel like when you do a podcast, you do develop like this emotional connection with someone because you're like intently looking them in the eyes, having a deep conversation.
Hear your voice right in my ear.
Yeah. And then so afterwards, I would say I've made so many friends now off the back of the podcast, just from like people I see them in the street and they come running up to me and hug me, and it's a cool thing.
It's nice to see you again. It's nice to share a whiskey. I really appreciate the effort of creating an entire podcast series and having 30 guests but you could have just asked me for a whiskey anytime.
Yeah, well, it was a long play, I wouldn't say it was the best play, but it was definitely a long play. Yeah,
I appreciate the effort.
Yeah, that's what I do.
And there's even a banquet dinner downstairs as well.
That's for afterwards,
all in my honor,
yeah, I know.
Really rolling out.
Tell your wife you're not coming home. How you been, man? Anyway, how has been life post Xero?
Yeah, it's good. It's
weird saying that to you, by the way. Life post Xero instead of life post Vend.
Life post Vend.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I had always mentally envisioned having a break at some point. And I think when Vend was in its crazy years.
Break or breakdown?
Well, probably one than the other. Hopefully in the right order. I kind of envisaged Vend taking off and IPOing and then taking a year out and figuring what I wanted to do next.
Yeah.
And actually, when I decided that my time at Vend was kind of coming to a close after about 6 years, I was quite intentional about what I wanted to do. And I engineered about a 6-week holiday, which was nice. And it's nice to have that time in between where you're not thinking about one job and you're not thinking about the next job.
Most people don't do that. They don't give themselves any time between jobs. And it's like context shifting, man. You're like, it's tough, right? You've got to give yourself a bit of space.
I think so, as much as you can. And so that worked out quite well. But then, I joined Xero at the point when it had about 1,200 people and a different type of growth, but it was still a pretty intense 5.5 years. And so by about 3 or 4 years into that, I was like, okay, I think I want to do about 5 or 6 years as well. And then I definitely want to take a bit of a break.
Yeah.
And, Vend had exited and I had a little bit of a nest egg that I could draw on. And so I intentionally said, I'll just take a bit of a career break. I'd spoken to some people that had done it. They gave me a lot of advice about, make sure you take it like 6 months, make sure that you don't commit to any work. And that's kind of what I set out to do. It happened that we engineered a 4-month visit to Wanaka with the family, and we put the kids in school. And I was able to kind of step away from work because I spent most days up the mountain with a little hip flask of whiskey.
I'm surprised you came back, man. I was like, that's it. We've lost another one down south.
Yeah, I mean, it was a bit of an experiment to see if that's a place that we'd like to live. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed getting my ski game on and having the kids, improve their skills as well. It's a nice place to be in winter. I think I always kind of imagined engineering a career break in summer, but the winter worked out because it's a great place to spend. I think in the end, I missed the beach.
Yeah.
I missed surf and waves, and I think it's a beautiful place in summer. A lot of people love to spend summer there, but I realized that Auckland was my home.
Yeah.
Auckland's probably about as smaller city as I can live in as well. It's amazing to have places like Wanaka to visit, but I felt like I was missing home, and this was my home. And so I concluded I wasn't going to live there, but I met a lot of people who had moved there and were moving there to work remotely and were really enjoying the lifestyle. And so it's very attractive. But it was, it was great. But interesting when I came back to Auckland, and so on that discussion about career break, I had really good advice. Don't think about anything. Don't make any plans. Give yourself at least 6 months. About 2 months in, you're like, oh, now what?
Yeah.
It's quite a strange feeling to have thought about something for a long time, actually do it, launch into it, and then it's like stepping off a plane, right? There's a great unknown. So what am I going to do now?
Yeah.
What are my plans? And I think I wanted to make myself uncomfortable like that because...
Do you have an overactive brain? Like, are you able to switch off even when you are working?
I'm an active relaxer, so I have to... I'll go for a run, or I'll go up a mountain, or I'll go surfing. And so, and usually about 20 minutes into a run, my brain sort of switches off.
Yeah.
And so, I think it was interesting. I was wrestling with, am I itching to do something because I'm just recovering from having been busy for 12 years?
Yeah.
Or is this just how I am? And actually, do I need to get on with finding what it is I want to do? And so a few things, kind of gave me permission to just not do anything. My wife had been working in real estate for a number of years and not really enjoying it because her background and her heart was in TV, and she got a great job at TVNZ as a commissioner.
Yeah.
So she went back into full-time.
What's a commissioner?
Oh, so she's responsible for finding and producing locally made content.
Okay.
So she's responsible for Shortland Street.
Yeah.
So I've been watching a lot of Shortland Street.
I've never seen an episode.
It's a really good show. It's still going. And I in a way, it's like she's almost like a partner at a venture fund. They're responsible for filtering through all of the kind of scripts and ideas and creative things going on in New Zealand, helping them get funded and helping them get made and put onto the air. And her background's in comedy, TV. She worked on The Office in the UK and The Mighty Boosh, and so she's back in a happy place, helping make locally made content. For me, I was like, oh, that's great. Okay, I'm going to be a stay-at-home dad for a couple of months and help out around the house and kind of switch roles after all those years of flying around the world and helping scale startups.
Jumping out of planes,
throwing cash registers off buildings, and then it was kind of the summer holidays. It's like, nobody's really looking for anything around then, so I sort of gave myself till about January. But yeah, I definitely wanted to feel uncomfortable, feel what it is that kind of motivates me to get out of bed and what I want to do next. And it provokes anxiety at times, but it's also really enjoyable. And I think I've kind of landed on that in the last couple of months. And it just takes time. I think you got to kind of embrace it. You got to have enough space to be able.
Do you feel healed? Like,
I don't think I was broken.
Yeah. Well, I guess. I mean, so I'll give you some context from my point of view, right? So last year,
nice
straight whiskey does that to you. Last year, I had a tech company, trying to acquire Telenami and like threw out big money. And the biggest thing that I couldn't get around my head was, well, what the fuck do I do next? You know, and it made me realize that unfortunately work was too much of an important thing in my life, you know, and I needed to try and fix that. And so I went out and did some things to fix it. You know, I talked about it a lot on the podcast, did a psychedelic experience, stopped working, did a podcast, do all these things. Yeah. And it wasn't until that I slowed down a bit and started thinking differently that I realized that, man, I was burnt out for a long time, and I was just able to carry that burnout more than other people could. So when I finally stopped, I went through a process of like physically having to remove stuff from my shoulders and realize what I could do going forward and do it differently.
I think, probably. I probably feel, healed is a good way of describing it. When you're in the thick of it, you don't really pay attention to it. And at the same time as Vend was blowing up, I also, my family was, I described the analogy between my family and a high growth startup as being very similar. When I joined Vend, I had a sort of 9-month-old daughter. 2 years later, I had twins. So we had 3 children under the age of 3. Our family was scaling. We were running a cash flow negative. We were financed by the mortgage in the bank. And, I could sort of like see this pathway where probably in about 5 or 10 years, we'd come out the other side and we'd be in a better position. But the headcount in our family was growing and our costs were exploding. And all of this was happening in the startup at the same time. So this is very similar. And so both of these things were happening. And I really appreciated the opportunity to go and visit overseas on behalf of a company and establish a foothold. I spent my kind of teenage and early 20s traveling and paying for it out of my own dime when somebody was like prepared to fly me somewhere and go and do it for business. And I was like, this is incredible. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. But it's also very taxing, right? You're traveling, you're working 24 hours a day. When you're traveling, you get home, my wife was looking after the kids all week, and then it's okay, you're on now. You got 3 kids under the age of 3 that you're looking after all weekend, and then you're back in the office with jet lag the next week, and you just kind of do it over and over, and you don't really know any other way, so you just kind of live it and experience it. But I think it probably does catch up with you, and I think by the end, I probably wanted a bit of a break from that, or I'd say definitely through COVID, I started to like a lot of people, I started to find a bit more balance.
Yeah.
I think I was like, actually, I don't have to be in the office every day. I don't have to miss dinner every day. I can be effective without being on 12 hours a day.
Yeah.
And I can create a bit more balance between physical activity and mental activity. And so,
because your job at Xero was huge too, man. Like it wasn't like you jumped straight out of one fire into the next in terms of like taxing physically and emotionally.
Yeah. In a way, I felt like it was. I felt like it was going to be more cushy because it was a bigger organization. You know what I mean?
You were hoping it would.
I was hoping. I was like, I've just been. When I finished at Vend, I was like, okay. I joined Vend when it was just Vaughan and there was 2 of us, and it was, but when I left, there was 200 of us, and at one point we got to almost 300. And
let's start there, right? So let's tell that story, because I've heard the story over beers a few times. I've heard it from 5 or 6 different people about the early days of Vend, and I hear origin stories all the time. Some really good PR-driven origin stories on the podcast, and some really honest stories. So because you were first employee of Vend, right?
Yeah, I think I was on the payroll before Vaughan and Mel were.
Yeah. How did it all come about?
Yeah, I mean, how far back do you want to go? All I wanted to be in my 19-year-old self was playing music for a living, and that's what I did. I went over to the UK, and I played in bands, and I mucked around, and I kind of did a bit of IT support behind the scenes because I figured I probably needed something to fall back on when the music doesn't work out. And when I came back to NZ, all I had on my CV was IT support for a point-of-sale company in Edinburgh, which is like in the late 90s. And then I'd been working for a live music company, running all their systems and websites and everything. It was an amazing job. Our offices were backstage at the Brixton Academy. I'd hang out at lunchtime watching Tool sound check. It was pretty cool, but it paid nothing. And so when I got back to NZ, I was like, this is kind of, I was 20, just gone 30. It's like, okay, this is the first point where I'm like, what am I going to do now? And we got married and had
So your career started at 30, really?
Yeah, I mean, I trained as a physiotherapist, if you can believe it or not.
That's good for me to know because I'm recovering.
Yeah. Everyone's got something wrong with them, which is, and it's really hard to fix people. And at the time, I was working with computers because I was audio engineering, and I was, reformatting computers and using 8-track recording. And so it's much easier to pull a computer apart and fix it than it is a person.
And talk to them.
And they get paid more as well. And so, and every time you meet someone, they don't ask you to fix their computer. But if you're physio, they ask you to fix their neck. And so, I kind of pivoted into IT, but I was playing music most of the time. And I happened to be the one that managed the band website. And at this time, we were kind of on MySpace when it was really early, and would go and play a gig, and people would show up because they'd joined our MySpace page. And I kind of joined the dots between that and thought, holy, there's something in this. When I came back to NZ, I was doing consulting and contracting for a few clients, and I got to my first tax year. I'm like, I'm going to get audited unless I...
What do you mean by consulting? What were you consulting to?
Web development, front-end web development. Yeah. I kind of turned that into more... I realized I wasn't a very good software developer. I was building HTML tables in an email marketing campaign, but to install a system, I was sort of at the limit of my ability. And I started working for a PR firm who was moving into social media, and I kind of brought those things together. I was like, actually, I think I'm better at taking the technical stuff and actually working out how to message it and reach an audience.
Yeah.
And I was, my brother got me into Xero. He had a retail business. He actually bought the master franchise for T2 here and opened the first store in 2008. Great year to start a retail business.
Nothing bad happened.
Nothing bad happened in 2008, but I helped him set up the till system. We went to Australia and trained on it. It was like a $50,000 till system running off of Windows NT computers with a head office machine that we had to put in the cupboard because you had to have a head office machine even though we were one store. And at the time we were using Xero for accounting. It's like, this is crazy. Xero is so easy, so user-friendly. Why are we still using a point-of-sale system like this? And like literally 6 months later, through the Xero newsletter, they said, oh, we've got one of our first add-ons joining the add-on marketplace, as they called it back then. And it's a point-of-sale system. I was just like, okay.
How funny that you ended up running the marketplace at Xero years later, and you found your first job at Vend via the marketplace.
I still have the email. I've used it in slides at keynotes at XeroCons, just talking about that journey as like Xero was a light bulb moment for me. I tried all of the software, cash management, accounting software solutions, and it was like, you had to know double entry accounting to figure out what the hell you were doing. The first time I used Xero, it was like money coming in and money going out. It's like, oh, this is kind of fun. And then I looked online and people were raving about it on Twitter. It's like raving about accounting software.
People rave about things on Twitter?
This is 2009. People, this is, back when Twitter was kind of new and interesting. And accounting software was like, why were people falling in love with accounting software? It's so boring. And at the time I was consulting with a advertising agency. We were doing email marketing, and I discovered MailChimp. It was like email marketing, boring, pedestrian, but incredibly fun to use. This little monkey that would pop up and give you tips. I tried to set up Magento for a client. It was a nightmare. And the last time I did web development. And then I found out about Shopify and immediately regretted using Magento. And it was the same deal. These almost kind of consumer brands building business applications that were fun and easy to use. And they all worked together, right? You could connect MailChimp to Shopify. You could push time tracking into Xero. And you could effectively build for a small business this ERP system that was fun and easy to use, was low cost, and would give them the same kind of a power of a SAP without them having to pay for it. And so I just kind of got interested in that space generally.
So what was the email or the phone call to Vaughan then?
Yeah, well, I heard about Vend through the newsletter. I'd looked around at jobs at Xero, but they're all in Wellington. There wasn't really anything going in Auckland. I think I immediately sent it to my brother. I said, we should get this. Or what a shame we didn't have this a year ago. And I sent it to about 3 people. And then I think I just emailed him through their help center. I assumed it must have been a company with like 5 people. It looked kind of legit and had US dollar pricing. Turns out it was just him working on it part-time. And I just said, I think this is a fantastic idea. It's kind of like the idea I had, but didn't have the ability to actually go and execute. I'd love to help you out if and when you guys are looking at growing and whatever capacity that is. And he got back to me pretty quickly. And I think I just went and caught up with him a couple of times. I just kind of asked him about his business, what they're doing, told him some of my ideas. And I just said, like, I don't know if you're hiring or if you're growing, but I'd love to get involved in some way. And I wasn't even talking about price or role or title or anything. I just said, I'm freelancing and I have a bit of time in my week. And so we can probably find a way that I can help you out a bit of the time. And that was probably late 2010. And then early in 2011, we had another meeting. He's like, yeah, it's like things are getting busy. I'm trying to do everything. I'm trying to write code and manage customers and deal with support. I said, well, I used to work on the support desk for a point-of-sale company. And I got about 20 hours of the week filled for kind of consulting, which pays me reasonably well. How about I come and work for you mornings for $20 an hour? Like, it was literally that. It was the kind of, what's the absolute minimum cost so that you can give me a try and I can give you a try? And I just went there every morning, picked up all the support tickets, answered all the sales queries, and started to poke around on the website, the blog, and kind of took that stuff off of his plate so he could focus on building software. And, within about 3 months, it was evident there was more than 2 people could do half-time. And I think I went in full-time at that point, and he kind of gave up his consulting work and went in full-time. But it was still a good 4 or 5 months after that before we raised any cash and actually started growing the team. But it was very loosely defined. It was just, I'll kind of do the customer stuff.
Yeah.
Custom marketing, customer success, sales. You do the sort of engineering and product, and then there's a lot of crossover in the middle. I couldn't support something, he had to do things. And it kind of grew from there. I think we gradually realized that we needed somebody who actually knew how to do sales properly.
Yeah.
So we hired our VP sales, JC, Jean-Christophe.
Yeah. Whose number I I have.
Whose number? Who I thought was calling me when you phoned.
I get so many calls from France, and they just speak, and I speak French, and I replied back to them saying, "Sorry,
this is the unsexiest French accent."
I'm the unsexy Australian guy with the unsexy French accent. Yeah, for people that know, JC is a good-looking rooster, and he's French.
Yeah, he really is. He always smells great too.
Yeah.
And then about 6 months after that, there was kind of.
When did you know though? Right. So when did you know Vend? Because obviously I approached Vend because I wanted to work at Vend just because there was something I saw in Vend that I was just like, like that for me feels like a place I need to work at and I want to work at. But when was the moment for you?
Oh, it was as soon as I saw it. I think I'd had a couple of failed attempts at entrepreneurialism. Sometimes I get an idea and I think I should go and do that idea, and then I see that somebody's already done it. I think, well, the next best thing is to go and help with the thing that's already been done.
If you can't beat them, join them.
and I that failed spectacularly once when I imported half a container of bicycle lights back to New Zealand. One of my first ventures when I moved back, I was cycling around London in the middle of the night, trying to indicate turns, going through like Elephant Castle roundabout in the dark with buses surrounding me, trying to let people know where I was going, and almost dying. I thought, why doesn't somebody do indicators on a bicycle? I was like, how would you do that? Start drawing it out. And then I saw one of those inventor shows about a week later where somebody had invented bicycle lights that had indicators on them. And I just kind of called them and went down to see them in Richmond and said, you guys have a license for this in Australia? I'm moving back there. And they're like, no. I said, okay, well, I'll buy half a container and get 2 years license. And I brought them home. Not really any idea how to sell products or get distribution. How much
is half a container of bicycle?
It was nothing. It was like $30,000 or something like that. I suppose that was quite a lot back then for me. And then I got home and then I realized that all the distributors were locked up by existing suppliers and nobody wanted them. And also they were kind of big and clunky, and most people want small bike lights, and it was a bit of a novelty. In the end, I just sold them on TradeMe and online, and over the course of a couple of years got rid of them all. It was a lesson for me in marketing, because it was like I believed in the product, so I thought that there had to be a market for it. Turns out it was a niche market. Just because I believe it doesn't mean there's a market for it. At the same time, a good friend of mine actually launched a business selling Ugg boots into the UK. Not because he wore Ugg boots or liked them, but because he had access to the manufacturer, and he saw the Google search trends in the UK that were spiking in Ugg boots. And this is back in the early days of Google when you could get onto #1 ranking with a few well-placed backlinks. And he bought a container of Ugg boots, set them up in his garage in Tauranga, and within about 3 months, he was selling $200,000 of Ugg boots.
Wow.
Every month.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay. So you're better to kind of go for the thing where there's a market.
Yes, supply and demand.
Yeah. and so when I was using Xero, I remember thinking, I'd worked in point of sale. My brother's point of sale was terrible. I bet somebody could do this for point of sale. Oh, I'm not a developer. It was one of those ideas I just kind of parked. And so when I saw it, I was like, okay, I think there's something in it. I think it was... Their marketing was kind of good. It looked nice. They had, Rowan Simpson and Southgate Labs were helping with the design, and others. So they made a really good polish, but there wasn't much going on in terms of brand. The blog was pretty dry.
Did you know you wanted to be a marketer at that stage, or were you just trying to figure out you would I could do lots of things?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was I had been doing it. I'd moved from tech into kind of PR and comms and marketing. I'd spent years trying to play in bands and showmanship and getting an audience and all of that stuff. But I'm not a classic marketer by any means. I didn't train in it. I only had to learn the 4 Ps later on. But I could see the opportunity to connect with the brand and an audience in a way that wasn't being done. And I could see that companies like Xero, Shopify, MailChimp were doing that. And most B2B marketing back then was like stock photos of people high-fiving each other over whiteboards.
And explain a video.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like it didn't represent the emotional motivation of the people that were quitting their day jobs to start breweries. In fact, I remember one of the first case studies was the brewer down in Wellington.
Parrot
Dog. Yeah. And he was an accountant who quit his job to start a brewery. And I was like, this is amazing. Why aren't people talking to people in a language that they can relate to? And what a fantastic opportunity to do that for a point of sale, because point of sale is boring. Like literally POS.
Well, you definitely were responsible for creating a culture of doing things differently, right? And a lot of that was in the early days was through fun mediums like video and just doing crazy stuff, right? So
Yeah.
was that strategically planned from you, or was that you just were like, this will be fun?
As much strategy as there is in there days at the start.
Yeah.
I guess we kind of knew what we wanted to be like and where we wanted to go, and then we would just try a lot of things to see if it would work.
Some of the big ones for me that I remember is that, I joined Vend because of the Wear What You Want video. Like I remember being in recruitment, wearing a suit every day, thinking, what the fuck do recruiters wear suits for? Like, and I was having this debate with my boss about like, we shouldn't wear suits anymore. And then so an Australian CEO said, no, you have to wear suits. And I went, okay, and just didn't tell her. And we stopped wearing suits the next day and just wear t-shirts and jeans instead. And then the Vend video came out and I was like, it should be. Who cares what you wear?
Yeah, I think a few things that probably fed into that. One was, as a small company on the other side of the world that was, couldn't afford phone support, couldn't be on the ground, couldn't serve our customers, we could be kind of abstracted and removed from them. And so part of our early thinking around this was like, how do we create an emotional connection between our customers and us in a scalable way? And sometimes it was little things like on our support system, having profile photos with a green background.
Yeah.
So then when you're talking to someone, it's not just a robot, right? It's actually a person, you know who they are. A lot of it was like on our website, making sure people knew who we were and what our mission was. And I think video was a sort of, this is the early days of YouTube as well, and brands creating incredible videos that got viral reach, like the Dollar Shave Club and Lonely Sandwich. And so
but you guys jumped out of a plane and paid for something on PayPal while you were skydiving, and then the CEO of PayPal then sent out a message to all these teams saying we need to be doing shit like this.
It's just like, we didn't have a lot of budget, but we knew we could be creative and probably get on the radar of people. Yeah. And those videos, and we never got a video that had like 20 million views and millions of followers, but I think they got in front of the right people at the right time.
Yeah.
And a lot of them we just cut ourselves. I mean, I had an SLR camera and I'd just shoot things and edit it. That video, I think we got an opportunity to partner with PayPal. We went and launched with them in the States, which, by the way, as a kind of fan of technology, a fanboy, I was like, oh my God, I'm working for this small tech company in New Zealand. We've been invited to go to the States. We did a launch in Silicon Valley, and we've got all of these kind of big companies working with us. And then we just leveraged that as much as we could. They were kind of looking for ideas, and we said, oh, we've got a customer who does a skydive school. Vaughan's like, can you give us 20 grand to go and shoot something? And then we were on a plane the next day, and I took my camera, and we just set it up and filmed ourselves, and we got them to do the GoPro video of the shot. And I was cutting it in the airport on the way home. In the lounge, just like, here we go, I think this is good. And it was done 2 days later. So there wasn't really a script or a lot of thought. It was just like, okay, I think we can do something that will get noticed, that kind of talks about the problem, but also injects a little bit of fun. And
just fucking do it.
Just fucking do it, yeah. And a lot of the early content was like that. A lot of the early thinking is, we'll try things. That seems to get a bit of reception. We'll try another thing. And it was very much about, partly I think, just trying to cut above the noise. Trying to get a little bit of attention for us as a small upstart and in a large global market. I think partly it was to put a sort of human face on who we were as a brand and a company, that we're not a stuffy till software from the 1980s. We're kind of interesting, and we get you, and we love retail.
Young renegades of the software world, right? Because point of sale was really antiquated, like old school tech. It was like ERP system.
People hate it.
Yeah,
it's like the fax machine of the of the retail world. It's like, this thing sucks. You kind of want. I mean, touchscreens had to be robust because people wanted to hit them because they hated them so much. So the user on iPad was kind of novel at the time, and so I think it was just trying to take a kind of consumer lens on a B2B application and seeing if that would resonate, and trying to differentiate ourselves on the color, on the tone of voice. We always had to walk a line, right? We didn't want to be silly about it. We didn't want people to feel like we're just goofing around for the sake of it. We always had to kind of bring it back to the core mission and the focus. But
didn't want to get your recruiter in trouble.
So that was a stream of consciousness, actually.
Yeah, that was one. Hashtag FBombGate. Was it FBombGate?
Yeah, I mean.
So let's tell that story quick. Yeah. So
okay.
So was it a VP marketing role? I think it was.
This was about 2014 or 15.
So it was like a senior marketing role, and you were quite passionate about writing the copy yourself for the ad. Normally, we would write the copy for the ad.
Yeah.
And Kirsty and I were like, yeah, well, go for it. You write great copy, like. And so you wrote it, and I published it under my name.
Yeah. It all happened quite quickly.
And then Twitter started yelling at us.
So this was about the time when Vend was kind of growing towards 300 people and trying to think like a big company. And actually, like in reflection, the fact that we had to kind of pare back and scale back was probably a good thing at a good time, because it felt like it was getting a little silly, a little out of hand. And it is really interesting. I mean, we'll park that conversation for later, but the fact that the whole tech industry is going through it now, I felt like we had a sort of taste of that in 2015, and it definitely colored some of my approach to funding, growth, all of that since. But back then it was quite a lot of easy money. Every year we could raise cash, go faster, spend it, go faster. And that's what our investors were asking us to do. And as part of that, the leadership team, one of the rare things about Vend, I think, is that the core leadership team kind of stuck it out for a good 4 or 5 years. There wasn't a lot of turnover. I managed to kind of grow into the role. I think JC had experienced sale, and he stayed as a COO for a long time. We brought in Sharad, who was an incredible chief customer officer, and he'd had experience at Hootsuite. And there was a very, very tight, very core leadership team. And we got to a point where we were like, well, a company of 500 to 1,000 people is going to need more experienced people. So let's get a VP sales, let's get a VP of marketing, get you off the tools so you can kind of think more strategically. I'm like, oh, okay, I better get somebody really big and, and important and serious. And so I'm like, what do I need? And I just kind of sat down one day and in 30 minutes blurted it out. And I think I put in the F-bomb there. It was like,
I think you wrote, I think the quote was, and correct me if I'm wrong, something Vend, and it's a fucking awesome place to work, or something like that.
Yeah, it was an adjective. It wasn't the verb version of it. I wasn't insulting anybody. It was just me.
I didn't think it was obtuse at all. Like, and we used, like we mentioned just fucking do it before. JFDI at Vend was it wasn't just fucking do this, Nick. Drink that whiskey.
It's not the imperative version of JFDI.
It was, hey, if you've got a good idea, just fucking do it.
Yeah, and I do think, certainly in the early days of a startup, you don't overthink things too much. As you get larger and corporates get larger, right? That you tend to worry about the risks more than you do the opportunities, and you tend to overthink things. And I think one of the challenges as you're going through that journey, going from just a few of you to 50 of you to a few hundred of you, is that you can kind of stray from that early, slightly recklessness, risk-taking mindset. And that, if that's your passion, that's what excites you. Sometimes you need to find it again. And so I liked writing. I like writing. I like the process of it. And so, technically people could write blog posts or could write job descriptions for me. But where it's something that's like really important to me, someone I'm going to work with and sit next to on a plane, it's like I want to kind of describe to this person what I'm looking for. And I just, it was literally stream of consciousness. I don't even think I proofread it. I handed it to you, and then it went out, and then it just blew up because there was a swear word in it.
Yeah, and then so people were attacking me all over town, like because I wrote a swear word in that, and I didn't want to throw my boss Nick under the bus, so I was like, I'm sorry that
I think I stayed pretty quiet on it. I was just like, I just let people figure it out themselves, and there was kind of two camps, wasn't there?
It blew up in Australia first. Because there was a guy that I had rejected a few times for a sales job who, I won't go into the reasons why, but it wasn't a good fit. He was not a fan of me. Yeah. And so he blew it up initially in Australia. And then off the back of that, it started blowing up. And then one of the recruiter association guys, old school dinosaur of the industry, he then wrote blogs about it and blah, blah, blah. And then it got there was 3 blogs written about it. And then so we thought, all right, well, we're going to have to respond, And then so I wrote a blog, which we all sort of contributed to, which was something. And then off the back of my blog, some guy in Auckland, and I can't remember, he was the guy that ended up coming around for a tour in the office to see if we were whipping people, because we had just fucking do it as a value. And so
it's
and then you eventually had to come clean and say, hey, poor little Troy in Wellington.
Yeah, it wasn't him. It was me. It was me. Oh, yeah, that's right. I did.
Yeah.
I think I did a mea culpa. I mean, so there's no such publicity as bad publicity, right? And actually, in the end, it got on the radar of this incredible hire who almost joined the team. And it was one of the hardest things when he had to restructure and cut costs, was have to call him and say, sorry, because he was selling his house in the States. He was moving here. He was going to join, he was looking for a kind of change in life, change of pace, and he loved New Zealand, loved the company. Yeah, and this guy had been the CMO at Intel, Donald McDonald. He'd managed like a $4 billion marketing budget. He'd been the CMO at Qualcomm as well. It's like, you should be my boss's boss, but I just want to work with you because you're a cool guy and I want to learn a lot.
And didn't you reference the swear word or something?
Yeah, and he said it was one of the things. He was like, I like the cut of this company's jib. They seem kind of honest and transparent, and I heard about it. And so, I think you put it out there and you never know what's going to come from it. This is kind of my, I think you've just got to take a few steps. There's two things I'll comment on that. One is I do wrestle a little bit with that whole sort of tech bro.
Yeah.
Are we being smart for the sake of it? Are we swearing because it's kind of we're just trying to be different, but actually we're just being assholes. And so I'm always mindful of that. I always try to walk a fine line between those two things.
Says on the podcast called "We Fucking Love Startups."
Yeah,
but I don't feel vulnerable at all now. Don't worry, keep going.
No, but I do. I also believe in just kind of putting ideas. This is creativity. It's like not everything's going to work, but you gotta try a few things. And actually, to your original question, how did I end up at Vend? I think my end to Vend, ironically, as I said, I had a few entrepreneurial ideas that didn't fire. When I was living in the UK. I love comedy. I've always kind of had a thing about satire. I love The Onion, and I started like a version of The Onion for the UK, which wasn't very popular. It was called The Ronson Rider. I just kind of wrote joke articles, and I just sat there for a long time and didn't do anything. I came back to New Zealand. I read stuff white people like. Oh, this is cool. You remember that book?
Yeah.
They like go to festivals and they like rock bands, and at the time I was experiencing New Zealand for the first time after living away for 12 years. And when I grew up in New Zealand, I thought New Zealand is normal and everything about New Zealand is normal. When I came home after 10 years, I'm like, why don't people wear shoes in winter? Why doesn't anybody have central heating? Why are we always kind of cutting down tall poppies? And I was having catch-ups with friends who'd also moved home, and we were kind of working through the culture shift of coming back to New Zealand. I've talked a lot to people that move here as well. It takes you like 6 months to a year to get over the fact that there's tumbleweed most nights of the week.
People won't let you in.
People won't let you in.
Yeah.
So I started writing a blog. It was kind of like stuff white people like, but for New Zealand. And it was called Kiwiana Rama. And one of the things I wrote about was our obsession with Trade Me. I think I called it Trade Sheep, and it was kind of like a platform for selling farming goods. And so anyway, I backlinked to a Rowan Simpson article, and then he backlinked on his to mine. I said, he read my blog. And then when because he was blogging at that time. And so when I heard about Vend, I think I emailed Rowan and said, you don't know me, but you read my blog. Can I get an intro to Vaughan? And so I think I'd hit him through the support website. But in the end, I actually got an email from Rowan. And part of, for me, it's the Vend question was like, I know this thing is, I can see the application of it. I love the user experience. I know point of sale is a horrible, horrible industry. But the fact that Rowan was involved, the fact that Sam Morgan was an investor, I was like, okay, so they just exited from Trade Me, and now they're investing in this and a few other things. I think there's a bit of a making of an ecosystem happening here, right? There's what's going to happen if this kind of grows up, and Xero was starting to blow up at the time, and so it was very intentional. It wasn't just the fact that it was a great product. It was like, I think it's backed by some interesting people, and I'd like to meet them and to get involved and work with them, and I think
pretty smart thoughts for a bum muso from. That came back to New Zealand without any real strategy.
Maybe. But it's luck and just putting it out there, I suppose. And so yeah, I mean, having just created a dumb satire blog making fun of New Zealand was one of the ways I got into Vend.
Isn't it funny how, like, when you think back, right, the little nuances that happen because of your life, like the sliding door moments, if you could see your life in data visualization in terms of the opportunities of how you went one way and could have gone the other way and the likes, it would be, I mean, it's a weird Black Mirror episode there that we're probably co-creating.
Yeah. What did you put in the whiskey exactly?
Yeah. What would you hope that your legacy at Vend would be, or what do you think it is?
I don't know. Here's a funny thing about marketers is that they're like chefs. They're really great at creating stuff, but when they get home, they don't like to cook. And marketers are really great at creating brands and helping create momentum for founders and reaching customers, but they don't really like to talk about themselves.
Yeah. Well, this is a bad time to be on a podcast.
It is. It probably is. I don't know why I agreed to this, frankly, but I guess my legacy. I don't really think too much about legacy. I'm more interested in what we achieved as a company, rather than my impact on it, because that was kind of
But you definitively have massive impact on Vend, Nick. Like the Vend rocket ship was initially in the early days, to me, was like you and Vaughan and Mel, and and then it sort of grew out watching it. And so I think my experience of what you made Vend approachable, and that's approachable from an employment brand, from a customer base. You made have you ever read that book Raving Fans?
I haven't, no.
Good marketing book.
Okay.
Yeah.
As a non-traditional marketer, I should probably read up on it.
Yeah. So that for me was Vend always had raving fans. People just couldn't shut the fuck up about Vend. And I feel like the brand and the marketing and the videos and the strategy and even just your approachability with when we were recruiting and when we were doing things or when you're in different teams, you're definitely more approachable.
Yeah, I think, I was having fun. And I think Vaughan was having fun, and we kind of couldn't believe our luck in a way that, we had this thing that seemed to resonate with people. And I guess we kind of wanted to share that and hopefully other people would get that sense, and then that would help them choose whether they want to work with us or whether they want to use our product. It would help them differentiate in the market. Don't forget, I'd spent my 20s, ironically, trying to create something in a band, right? Like the sense of being with a small group of people, having a purpose, trying to get an audience, trying to go and tour and see the world. And it's like that was my defining purpose for a good 10 years. It turns out nobody wanted to buy music.
Yeah. Or your music.
Or my music. Or CDs. So this is between CDs declining and Spotify taking off. And we were making country music 6 years before it became cool again. But strangely enough, I found it in a startup. I found that sense of, there's a few of us and we've got this idea and it's getting momentum and now it's going overseas.
Traveling the world.
Now we get to travel the world. We get to tour with it, and
making music videos.
Making music videos. I wrote the songs on some of the music videos just because I couldn't be bothered. I was too tight to pay for royalty-free music. I just used some of the shit from my back catalog, and so I think we were genuine and we were kind of open about that. And I guess we tried to make that part of the culture and part of the brand.
Yeah.
And if that's something that was still there and was kind of continued after I left Vend, then I think that's a great thing
legacy,
to be part of. Yeah.
Legacy even. Awesome, man. Hey, it's funny. I loved the band room at Vend too. I love that you were let's have a band room. I'm still a music guy.
One day.
I may be this big corporate CMO guy now, but deep down,
a lot of people. Software is a very forgiving profession to failed musicians.
Yeah, I honestly thought I think it was a Kirsty or VP or someone. So after the Vend exit or the shares, were sold and the likes. Someone said, what do you think Nick's going to do now? And I was like, I've tried to get Nick out of Xero a few times and I don't think he's going to go into tech. I think he's going to go back to being a muso and he's going to release some album and we all have to see him in the street and go, yeah, it was awesome. Yeah, we'll listen to every word. Yeah.
Yeah, I started this rolling midlife crisis when I hit 40. You got a Porsche now, haven't you?
I'm 43, I drive a Porsche. I had a motorbike and I got hit by a truck.
Yeah. So I bought myself an electric drum kit when I turned 40 because I played the guitar, but I always fancied myself as a drummer. And I used the drum kit in the band room at Vend. And so I started learning how to play drums. I eventually got a surfboard and took up surfing. I took a career break. I was like, I'll probably take up crochet. I don't think I'll buy a sports car yet, but I'll get some version of it. And
it's overrated, if I'm honest.
Yeah. So I think... I don't think I'm ready to go back to music yet. And part of the reason why is I kind of need musicians. What I've realized is that I'm not a good solo entrepreneur / founder. What I love about being in a band is being with other people and having accountability and having a reason to show up every day in the creative process. And it's kind of the same with entrepreneurialism, right? If I'm by myself, I'll just end up bumming around and chewing through social media or go for a surf or go for a run. But when you're working with someone, even if it's one other person, you can get that kind of energy and that's like, okay, you do this, you do that. And I feel, oh shit, I better keep up because you're doing that. So it's the same. So I don't have a band yet. But I did actually, I intentionally took a break from music when I came home and started a family. And I think I got out of music because I didn't want it to become a job, if you know what I mean. Like I wanted to retain my love of it. I don't want to be 40 playing pub gigs, John Farnham covers, that kind of thing. And so for a long time, I wasn't playing. But I did actually start rehearsing, jamming again recently with Sam Gribben from Melodics, who I'd met when he finished at Serato, and we'd kept in touch when he started Melodics. But actually, he was a friend of a friend. And
is that how you joined the board?
well, the two things sort of worked in parallel, but it definitely helped. I have this, I do have a weird journey into companies, I have to admit. But so Melodics is music software. It's like it's in fact, we hired an amazing new marketing director, Sarah, who described it as Guitar Hero meets Duolingo. So it's got that sort of visual feedback of Guitar Lingo and the gamification of Duolingo. But of course, their office is full of instruments. And they have a jam room, a literal jam room. And so every month or so, less during COVID, more frequently during the winter, a few people just kind of get together and just jam there for a few hours on a Friday night. And that's a lot of fun. Like there's no playing music just for the sake of it, no agenda. We don't have to work out a set. We don't have to go on tour. It has kind of rekindled my joy of it. But I don't think I'm ready to go back on the road touring yet.
I always enjoyed your music when you guys used to play. I like, definitely something there, mate. Maybe one day.
Maybe one day. I met a guy recently who was good friends with the head of the label for the band I was in, and there was one album that they released before I joined them that is still in the archive somewhere with Virgin Records, and it's the best album I've ever heard. I wasn't on it, but it was one of the things that inspired me to join that band. So if anybody knows anybody at Virgin Records who can get this out of the archives, I'd love to see it in the wilds. Unfortunately, he couldn't because he's no longer part of that. But yeah.
I'm sure the guys at Serato or Melodics will be able to.
Somebody will be able to.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah. I mean,
do you have any music online and Spotify or anything like that you...
Oh, no, I don't think so. Not mine. What I've realized through that and through Vend and through Xero and others is I think the thing that, and back to what am I doing now, I just have this kind of innate desire to create stuff and to put it out there, and that buzz that you get from seeing it reach an audience and seeing the reception of it. Yeah. Whether it was, having made an album, seeing my name on the sleeve and seeing people listen to me, if it's not like tens of thousands of people, it's very gratifying. It's just that kind of sense that you're making your mark on the world in some way. Yeah. I think with software, it's software, right? It's not like saving lives or anything, but there's quite a kick. You'd walk into a shop somewhere in London and then you'd look behind the till and it's like, oh my God, they're using Vend.
I still do it now.
That's cool.
I still look, like if I walk into a shop and I can see they're using an iPad or whatever it is and I'm able to see, I turn around and have a look. I mean, it's light speed now and it looks still like the Vend app, the iPad app, but it's still cool. Yeah,
and I think it's that same sort of, that same drive, that same mechanism, right? You have this creative bent, whether it's software, music, art, whatever it is. I think I just found within software, you could realize that same sort of creativity in a scalable way with something that people had to buy.
How do you, so as someone who is a marketer who learned on the job, right? How do you do that? And what advice would you give to someone right now that's probably in a role in a startup now that's listening to this thinking, fuck, how did he do it? And
hire people smarter than you. That's always been my thing. Figure out what you're good at and what you're passionate about, and then find people that know a lot more than you about the areas that you don't understand. And I think I was kind of knew enough to be dangerous across a lot of different facets. I could instinctively, I knew how to translate complicated messages into language that humans understand. That was a big part of software marketing, right? And actually part of that, ironically, came from my training as a physiotherapist and working in hospitals and trying to explain complicated things to patients because the doctors would give them all this babble and we'd end up spending half an hour trying to say what was actually going on. So I think I kind of got that. I knew design and brand. I was pretty good at SEO and SEM, but not great. And so I just applied a little bit of that in the early days, but pretty quickly I'm like, I actually need somebody who's really, really good at search marketing. And we got very lucky and we found Francois, who was one of the best growth marketers anywhere in the world, and certainly in this side of the Pacific. He's now running growth at Canva.
Yeah. Awesome guy too.
Amazing guy.
Great basketballer.
Also got that amazing French accent.
Yeah.
We had a lot of French people at Vend. For some reason, we attracted all the French tech talent.
And interns as well. There was French interns there for a while.
I think that's right. We did. We we drew on all the talent we could at the lowest price we possibly could.
They were just
in the early
mesmerized
days.
by JC and
Yeah. And so, I mean, I knew a lot about brand and creating videos, but it got to a point where I couldn't do it all. And I got to work with Simon Pound on creating a video for us. And then after about 6 months, I'm like, do you want to just come and do it full time? And so I think you have to be prepared to sort of scale yourself. And the best way to do it is to find really smart, really talented people who can complement you and you can learn a lot from them, which means recognizing your own strengths. I guess just like reading a lot and learning a lot, but also not being afraid to ask for help and not trying to extend yourself into areas that you're not comfortable and experienced in.
Did you fake it though, or were you vulnerable in those days? Because if you had have asked me when I was walking around Vend and chatting to people, and if Nick had been a CMO in 3 different companies before, I would have said, yeah, definitely. Like it felt like you always knew what you were doing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I felt in the early stage of a startup, everybody feels kind of like an entrepreneur, and entrepreneurs are always figuring it out as they go along, and we all kind of were. And I guess I was lucky to have an amazing guy in Vaughan who trusted me and backed me, and we were amazing to hire some people that were really good at what they did, like JC, and I learned a lot from him, especially about slide decks and spreadsheets, which I'd never really used much before. But I was also prepared to give up things that I wasn't good at, so I could focus. Like I wasn't precious about holding on to sales. I knew there were people that were better at it than me. I knew that I couldn't do customer support and sales. I think I could do customer support better, but I really loved the marketing side, and so I was quite happy to see that go to somebody else. And so I never had much ego about it. I guess I always felt like I was kind of having to prove myself all the time, but also having the freedom and the opportunity to do that. And part of that was, having the trust of someone like Vaughan. Part of it was, I guess, self-driven motivation and pressure to continue to level up and perform. And then part of it was, a lot of it was luck. It was a good product at the right time with the right kind of tailwind for the right number of years that we were able to learn a lot on the job. And a lot of it was, there was classic marketing that was still relevant, 4 Ps, as I talked about. But it was the early days of, you could still goose your search rankings. You could still drive growth through the Xero app ecosystem because there weren't that many. You could kind of establish partnerships with large companies because there weren't many out there. And so we, a large part of it was kind of the luck and the momentum that carried us, and then kind of figuring out what worked along the way. So I was very grateful for that opportunity. But you have to continue to evolve and level up as well.
Yeah, I was a big marketing team at Vend for like size, like in terms of, and that's because like for the customers that was like that marketing was able to generate, for Vend, it was just phenomenal, right? Like, yeah,
I mean, I guess the company roughly was a third sales and marketing, a third R&D, and a third everything else, which is which is pretty common. And then the marketing and sales spend was 50-50, except that marketing was mostly budget and then a few people, but it did generate 95% of our business inbound, right? We ranked well on Google. We had great display advertising. We had good strategic partnerships, and we had a really good direct digital marketing engine that drove a lot of the growth. And I think, arguably the challenge with that is that there are limitations to it, right? And so it took us a while to find other channels and fire them up. But it's certainly still a really important part of the business's growth engine. And we were able to build a team that was really engineered around that funnel, right? How do we kind of attract people? How do we move them through the funnel? How do we retain them, build brand loyalty, tell them about all the new products and features? But I mean, a lot of that, how do you structure a team when you're going from 2 people to 20 people? It was drawing on the experience of those that had done it before. I literally asking for org charts from the VP of marketing at Slack and Andy Lark, who'd moved to Xero, because it was kind of a freedom of knowledge sharing. And if you're entrepreneurial and you're trying to figure things out and you're working with partners and there's not a competitive environment, people are generally happy to help you with that. And so there was a lot of, we would go down to Wellington, we would sit with the marketing team there that were 20 back when we were 2 and ask them how they did things. And so a lot of that kind of growth and that knowledge sharing happened within the partnerships that we had and within the ecosystem. And then some of it we just kind of worked out by ourselves, and some of it was just like you Google, what are the main functions of a marketing team and how do you build
What
it?
is marketing automation?
Yeah.
What did you realize when you went to Xero? Like, what was the culture shock for you there, if any?
Yeah, I knew that I knew that I was kind of ready to leave Vend. I think it had been an incredible 6 years, but I could see kind of what the next 6 years would look like, and it wasn't necessarily going to continue to grow. And I felt like I still had a whole bunch to learn, about, and I wanted to be surrounded by people that I could learn new things and new experiences. There was only really one company I was interested to work at, which was Xero. I think I kind of kicked the tires in a few others, but I think I heard that Andy Lark had stepped down, and I thought, okay, well, maybe there's some opportunities in marketing. And I sent a tweet to Rod. I said, can we have a chat? I think I just landed in Singapore. And I thought it'll be a few hours or a couple of days till he gets back to me. And he was like, now it's good. It's like, I'm just going into a 6-hour meeting. Can I call you later? He's like, yeah, fine. And I got on the blower with him at it must have been like 9 p.m. New Zealand time, but it was incredibly approachable and accessible. And I sort of asked him about what that means for the partnership. And then I said, I'm thinking about doing something new. And he's like, and he was really receptive and really open to it. And he kind of made a few introductions from that point, and then it evolved into the role managing the ecosystem, which I think it was another example of great timing. But I guess I'd established relationships with Xero. I had Rod's DMs. Like, all of these things matter, right, in terms of your career. Yeah. It's not just, you can't just kind of finish. It's like, now what? You generally have a bit of a plan going into it. And so culturally, I knew the company. I knew a lot of the people. I knew the space. I felt going from the partner side to the platform side would be a relatively kind of easy transition for me, but it was at a bigger scale. I didn't want to go back into a startup again. I felt like
ready for the next level.
Yeah, I was interested to see what it's like at a bigger scale. I felt like if I went back to a 10-person company, I'd be the guy they were looking to for ideas. But I wanted to go to a 1,000-person company and learn a lot of ideas. And so that was kind of what I was looking for. But there was that little part of me in the back of my mind, it's like, well, is this just going to be large and corporate and hard to get anything done? And so I thought, well, if I can last 3 months, I'll last a year. And if I can last a year, I'll definitely do 3. And I ended up doing nearly 6. I guess the culture shock for me, I had to learn a lot of new stuff. So I'd come from a marketing background, but we had digital marketing. We had an engineering team, front-end devs building the website, but I was responsible for a large engineering team and a product team. And it was like a massive learning curve for me, but really, really exciting. The partnership side, I had a lot of experience of, and there was a marketing team of 2, so I was able to kind of boost and grow that. Probably just how to navigate getting things done in a large company was a big learning curve for me. And Xero was figuring it out, right? It had gone to 1,000 people pretty quickly, and then it was growing from 1,000 to 5,000.
Was it political? 5 years. More political?
I just think there was just a lot going on, like a lot. Like the scope of the company, we were approaching 1 million subscribers spread across 5 main countries, but 100 really. There was an accounting product, a small business product, adjacent products. There was a tech team, a product team, a partnerships team. So we kind of spread all those things. Like there's no shortage of opportunities, and it's really hard to say no to all of it. And at the time, Rod was involved in the business and a super creative, driven founder who wanted to do everything. And so the challenge at Xero was just there was so much to do and so much opportunity. It was hard to decide what to focus on and then how to kind of get visibility for your area of the business and say, actually, I think this is really important and I think this is something that we should back. And what probably the surprise to me is what I thought I could get done in 90 days was actually more like 6 months to a year, because it takes you time to figure out the term I heard it in Succession recently. It's called the emotional architecture of an organization. It was he described how he's the only one that really gets that. And it's really true, right? How does this organization actually tick beyond the budgeting process and the spreadsheets and all that? Like, how do you kind of get things moving?
The emotional architecture, I like that. Yeah.
And I joined at the tail end of a budget process, and somebody's come to me, so you got a team of 40 people. How many engineers do you want? It's just like, I don't know. I've just come out of 3 years at Vend where we've been running a flat budget. So, 2, 5, I'm not sure. Like, I didn't have a lot of conviction in the early days about what we needed to do. I still have that, or had that entrepreneurial mindset where, let's just get a couple of people working on it for 3 months. And if it works, we'll get a couple more people. And if it works, we'll build on it from there. I think in building better strategic financial processes at Xero, they were trying to figure out, what does the future look like? What do we work on? How do we fund it? And then what do we prioritize out of the mix of all of these things? And, you'd have like 20 strategic priorities and 100 kind of lower level ones. And so it took me a full year to work out how all of that worked, what it meant to be a platform, what we really had to invest in, and how we kind of prioritize in the business, and then champion for it, like really advocate for it. And, in a large company, there was a bit of like an arms race for resources. So It's like, I was like, well, I need a few engineers. It's like, oh, that's not ambitious enough. We only want to fund things that are going to have $1 billion ARR in 3 years. And so we're only interested in things that have $100 million initial investment. Like, oh, I don't need that much. Or if I get that much, I don't know if I can spend it to realize the result. And so, but when there are people who are experienced bankers and management consultants who are really good at putting the business case together, you can get a little bit lost in the mix if you're not ambitious enough. And so I never got to the point where I'm like, I need 100 engineers to do something. But I'm like, I think there's this thing we can do. It's going to take us a few years. We're going to need at least 20 or 30 people, and it's going to look like this. I can't promise you it's going to achieve that, but I'm pretty confident based on the numbers. But let's get started with 10 and see where we get to. And so that for me was really interesting. I learned a lot about like how to build a business case, how to get resources, strategic budgeting, how to finance, how to deploy capital, how to hire a team. What's good and what's not good about it. By no means were they were still kind of figuring out every budget cycle, but that was fascinating. I got to work with incredible strategy people, strategic finance people, amazing product and engineering people. And like Xero has talent all over the world, right? Briefly, my boss was Kerry Goman, who led $1 billion business unit at Capital One Bank. And she was like everything you'd imagine about an incredibly impressive, polished, but really fun US exec. And I learned so much from her and how she built a team and how she ran that stuff. And so there was a ton of really incredible opportunities I got through that. But in the end, it gets a little bit hard to get things done, And so
just slower moving, right?
Yeah. And so this is I reflect on this a lot when I coach people through their careers. There's especially young people, right? It's like, I need the title. I need to be management. I need to manage lots of people. It's like, this is what my career trajectory looks like. It can actually move you further away from the things that bring you joy. And I don't regret it at all. I really enjoyed it. But there does get to a point where you're like, am I spending most of my days in meetings and signing off budgets and having things ghost written for me? And it's like, and at the end of that, if you really grind away at, over the course of 2 years, you can achieve something. And when you achieve it, it can be huge. When we launched the App Store, we flipped from a pure referral model to a kind of commercial pay-to-play model on the App Store, which, I guess controversial, but in my mind, it was the only way that we could get Xero to take this part of the business seriously and drive real meaningful growth for a lot of software companies that work with Xero, and actually literally put CAC dollars behind it and drive traffic into the App Store. But it was a huge, complicated program of work, and it takes a long time to move that through and to get all the buy-in and get all the legal sign-off. But when you launch it, you got this platform with like millions of people on it, right? And so the reach and the potential of it's really exciting.
Do you still get the same dopamine hit of launching something through osmosis, like with a huge team underneath you?
Yeah, because I got to get up on stage at XeroCon in front of 3,000 accountants and talk about it. It was literally, I remember walking out in London thinking, I wanted to do this in a band.
Yeah.
And I got to do it again. I was backstage and they're doing makeup and you're doing rehearsals and stuff. And they're accountants, but they're cheering and
they party hard. Those accountants
party really hard. It's like, this is cool. Like, this is really cool, but it takes a long time to get there. And I think I started to miss that more regular dopamine hit. You try to get closer to the action. You try to write your own blog posts or get involved in product planning sessions, but there's a bit of a risk that when you're a senior exec, it's like, I just want to hang out with the designers and come up with concepts. And they're freaking out because it's like, what are you doing here? You're micromanaging and it's...
And they're worried, right? Because they're like, if you're in their business, well, what the fuck's going on?
Yeah.
I interview so many execs all the fucking time, right? Who they would love to go back to doing what their little, niche is.
Yeah.
And they fantasize about it. And they usually, like the same probably 50 execs in New Zealand call me every 3 months. And they're like, oh, what have you got out there? And I'm like, nothing for less than $250,000 pay cut that you're going to take, or whatever it may be, depending on what some of them are. Some of them you'd be like, they're fantasizing with it. What the fuck? I worry about our country. But everyone, so many people feel the same, but they become institutionalized or they become trapped. And so luckily for you, right, like you've had some exits and the likes and done pretty well, and you're in this position now where you can come up for oxygen and say, well, what do I want? I've midlife crisis. I've taken my family on an adventure. I've dragged it back to Auckland.
Yeah. I've had the surfing accident. I survived it.
Yeah. So what is it now that what is it now that you're doing?
Well, I mean, I think there's two things.
Do you want some more whiskey, by the way?
Yeah, go on. Yeah. I mean, I've got the whiskey sweat going on. I'm sure that you can take that out in post. Thank you very much. I
You want a whiskey, Jono?
what I really enjoyed in the early stages of Vend, as we talked about, it's like, well, how the hell do you build a marketing team? What does it take to go to market? You're so deep in the weeds. You're so stuck figuring out all your own problems. You feel like you're an island. And then every now and then we would get to go and share ideas with others that were in the same boat. Point Nine Capital, one of our early investors, they would host this meetup every year, and they'd get everyone together. It's like, oh, I can't take a week out. Everything's really busy. No, let's do it. And you'd go, and you'd hear from all their portfolio companies. Like, oh my God, it's like, I've got that problem too. It's like a huge group therapy session, and it was the best thing. And that's where I heard Bill Makaitis, who was the CMO at Zendesk, and then went on to be the CMO at Slack. And I got his email address, and I'd call him a couple of times after that. That's where I got his org chart and helped to design my org chart. And so that was a part of my development, was learning from those that had been there before or that were in the same boat. When Vend started to get, I guess a little bit larger and a little bit more notice, people would come to me and it's like, I've got these problems, can you help me? And I really enjoyed helping and giving back, and just like, it was never like, you need to do this, but it's like, well, this is what we tried and it totally failed, but you could give it a go. Or I wouldn't recommend that.
We tried that,
don't do that. But also at the same time, it's like, oh my God, I'm forever amazed at innovation and the things that people can innovate around, right? There's just sort of limitless potential still. Even something you think that's been solved before, it can be solved again in a new and unique way. And I love meeting companies, and you're like, oh my God, you've come up with like a collar for cows. Who would have thought about that? Or you've a procurement management platform for enterprises, or an internal legal system. It's just like there's no shortage of ways to innovate. So not only do you kind of help them on their journey, but I'm naturally curious, and I find that stuff really fascinating. It's hard to do it when you got a full-time job. Like, part of the attraction for me, part of the reason I kind of was comfortable moving to a big company like Xero was that it was my dream gig, right? Managing the developer ecosystem and getting to work with a lot of the early stage startups. But you just don't have the time, the mental headspace to really be able to help.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate to be invited onto the board of Tradify when I was finishing up at Vend, and then I joined the board at Ambit kind of in my time at Xero. But that was about all I could have time for. I didn't, even with Sam, he's like, I'll pay you to consult and do some marketing support for us. Like, I don't need the money at the moment. I don't want to do it unless I think I can do it well. Mm-hmm. And so what's kind of been nice since I stepped away and had more time is it's like, people are like, can we catch up and pick your brains? You're like, yeah, sure, why not? It's fun. Like, I just enjoy the process of it.
Yeah.
It's kind of turned into one board seat. Some of it may become advisory. You can get very busy very, very quickly. And so...
Because you've actually got a company set up now, an advisory company,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. So I started working with my business partner, Rowan Alton. And
Rowan, one of the early
Rowan
engineers.
Was probably the first front-end engineer at Vend. Probably, I think,
And then went to Slack, did he?
Yeah, he went on to Slack. So he was there for the first 3 or 4 years. He's employee number 2 or 3, really, really early on. One of those developers that, I remember sitting next to him, the Gather conference that used to happen years ago, and he was only like 21 at the time. I was sitting next to him while he was coding. It's like, is this guy in the Matrix? Just like the speed at which things was happening. It's like, this guy's really, really good. And we kept in touch because he ended up marrying my sister. And now he has a couple of my nieces. But he was at Slack and I was at Vend, and I was finishing up. So I was at Xero. When I was finishing up at Xero, I've been at Slack for a while. I'm really enjoying it, but I feel like I need to do something again, be back on the tools. And so we were kicking around ideas late last year. There was a few companies.
In your relaxing time that you weren't meant to be working.
Yeah, relaxing time not meant to be working.
Yeah.
And we said, well, why don't we just, Slack offers a 6-week sabbatical for any of their team. You can just go and work on something. It's like, we've got a few ideas. I don't know if any of them are like game changing, but here's one that I think might have something. It's a problem that I have personally because I've been using Xero since 2009. And back in 2009, when I was contracting 2 or 3 days a week and had a young child, cash flow was a real struggle for us, right? And our mortgage interest rate was 11%. And, but what I found is if I was consulting and freelancing, I could claim some of that back as a tax deduction and claim it back on GST. And Xero was great if I ran everything through Xero, but there were all these personal expenses that I had to get in there somehow in order to claim them back. And it would only be a few $100 a month of tax-free reimbursals that I could get, but that was quite meaningful back then. And and I was using Xero Personal, if you remember. And it was like, cool, I can mark this as an expense. Let's send it to Xero, but then they shut that down. And I was using PocketSmith. I said, I can mark this as an expense, but it's kind of hard to get it out. And so I kind of jimmy rigged the system using Xero and bank rules, but it was kind of painful, and it was the slowest part of doing my GST returns. And so I said to Ron, well, we think that there's open banking creates opportunities, right? Because for those that don't know it, it's like bank data. The bank feeds aren't really a kind of advantage anymore. It's a commodity. People can authorize access to their bank data, and that's created huge opportunities in the UK. Really, really amazing. It's quite early in New Zealand. We thought, well, we can get bank data. What could we do with that? At about the same time, GPT was blowing up, and we're like, well, what if you put unstructured bank data through AI? What could you then do with that? And I said, oh, well, if it can help me claim my home office expenses every 2 months, that'll at least save me $14 a month on a Xero cash book, and maybe there's a product in it. And I spoke to my accountant about it. He's like, oh, this is a hassle. Every year chasing every client for that data, which they end up trawling through their bank accounts or looking through phone bills, and it slows down the end of the financial year. I said, well, what if we could theoretically solve that for you? And it's not like the biggest problem they have. It's not the biggest need that most small businesses have, but pretty much everybody that's self-employed or small business has this, and pretty much everybody does it really manually. And so we just said, well, why don't we spend 6 weeks working on it and see what comes out the back end of it. And what I found was just like the joy of just kind of creating stuff. Like
back to the early days.
Yeah. Just like sitting down at a desk, 2 people. It's like, well, let's see if we can get the bank data. Oh shit, it works. Let's put a year's worth of bank data through the GPT API and tell it that this is a business expense. And then we put another year through and we said, now tell us if that matches. And it was like 80% of them it got straight away. It was just like, oh, this is exciting. And then the tools that are available now, the ability to code in Vercel and deploy really quickly. We're using a front end called Tailwind. We weren't even like designing stuff. It was just like, I'd draw a table and then 2 hours later it would be live in production and we were testing it. And I think, to do that in a company like Xero or any large company or even a medium-sized company, it's like, it takes a long time. It takes a lot of engineers. There's a lot more. It's not just layers, right? You've got existing customer data. You've got a lot of other things to contend with. And it was really fun just kind of going through that exercise of building and shipping something from scratch. And I think at the back end of that, we realized 2 things. One, this could be a product. Who knows? Let's put it out there and see what people think. And we're sort of on that journey now. But at the same time, it's like this kind of the ability to unblock innovation to help companies get moving. There's got to be other people that need that. And so, maybe we can kind of help businesses who are trying to move quickly and test ideas or want to grow or, kind of need like fractional support as a CMO or a CTO. And so perhaps we can do one and get to work with some really cool companies to allow us to kind of keep working on our own product ideas. And that's kind of where we're at. And my hope is that, I get to help other companies in that stage of growth that we were at and, hopefully sort of pay something back because I love seeing companies thrive. The fact that there is now this kind of tech ecosystem in New Zealand, I think about back when Vend started, it's like, oh, you got Sam Morgan and Rowan Simpson and that's about it. I think there was a few other exits around that time. There's a whole bunch now. Like the industry has matured over 10 years.
You're just thinking about the exits in the last 3 years, right?
All of that cash is going to get recycled.
Yeah.
And it's not just the capital, right? It's all the experience. You've got all these people that have been through those scaled companies who are now able to help those next stage of companies grow and scale. And I think if New Zealand is serious about having tech as our number 1 export, it's just going to take a few cycles of that to get there. Silicon Valley's been doing it for like 70, 80 years. And eventually you'll get a recycle of capital, a recycle of talent, the ability to kind of exit that will create huge opportunities for this country. And I still feel very passionately about that.
Yeah, I think it is exciting. And I think the government is starting to see that now, that the precipice of the ecosystem is flourishing now, because we've seen a few different variations and waves or iterations of it now. And it's almost like when you throw a rock in a puddle, right? The rings that you're starting to see in the very edges now are the current time.
Well, this concept, was it the 3 Bs, like the batch, the boat, and the BMW? This is like New Zealand entrepreneurs, they sell out early and then they just go fishing. It's like, I've never met a founder of a tech company who exited and went fishing.
Yeah.
It's just too restless.
Yeah.
They want to keep getting involved. I mean, Rowan Simpson was incredibly active in Vend and multiple other companies, and he's still really, really busy.
Vend. He went Trade Me, Xero, Vend, Timely, like all the things.
Yeah.
I had lunch with him a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about all these other companies now, and I'm like, man. But
yeah, and I not New Zealand based, but Jamie McLean, who was one of the founders of Hobotalk, which Xero acquired for $70 million a few years back. He was at Xero for 18 months exactly.
Yeah.
And then he went off and had his kind of 6 month sabbatical. And he's one of the guys that said, don't do anything for 6 months. And then 6 months later, he's like, oh, we've made a majority investment in a company called A2X, which is a New Zealand founded company which connects e-commerce into Xero and has just, blown up over the last few years. And I was like, what are you doing? You don't need to work again. Why have you bought a company? He's like, it's just like, it's my identity. My work is my purpose, and this is what I like doing. And I'm in a really great position to be able to do it. And so I think as much as he gave me the advice to not work for 6 months, the thing that I took away from the conversation is it's like most people want to do something next.
I think if you are true to yourself, that you've let your body and mind relax, and then your mind starts thinking and getting creative and getting excited again, then you got to listen to that too, right? Like if your mind's ready in the position now where it's like starting to connect dots, and if I was to listen back to this podcast, and think about the data visualization of this podcast, I'd be like, man, if Nick sees a trend, back that fucking trend, right? Run behind him and jump into that because he's seeing it earlier, right? And so
that's very nice of you to say. Thank you, Troy.
Pleasure.
I think there's also a spreading your bets aspect to it, right? And it's like, you don't know exactly what's going to work, but if you do nothing, you know that nothing's going to work. And so putting it out there is a big part of it.
Yeah.
Placing a few bets. And then you kind of look back on the ones that work. It's like, oh, that was great. But also there's a bunch.
Well, we don't talk about them.
We don't talk about the ones that didn't work.
Yeah. Hey, I think they're starting to play the Oscars music here downstairs to slowly wrap us up. I can hear a pianist playing.
Yeah.
And so before you go down and join them and say, hey, I'm Nick Houldsworth, musician.
I'm the guest of honor.
Yeah. So one thing that you wouldn't have heard yet, because the season 2's question now is not the what makes you happy question that we've been asking on season 1, but we're now saying, like, if you were to give me one link to put in the show notes, whether it be a person, whether it be a podcast, whether it be a blog, whether it be a book, whether it be a cult, whatever it may be, right? What's the one thing that you would be like, hey, this did something for me, you should go and check it out?
It's probably Hobotalk on Spotify, a band that I was in. Actually, the license in New Zealand doesn't feature the albums that I was on, but the singer and his first album that was released on Virgin Records is still on there. And it's like one of the most beautiful records I've ever listened to, and I still listen to it, every other week.
What's the album called?
It's called Beauty and Madness.
So Hobotalk, Beauty and Madness. Go and check it out. We'll put it in the, we'll have the album cover here, Jono. I love creating hard overlays for Jono.
Yeah, and maybe if enough people listen to it, I can get the band down here for a tour, and then I can actually get back into my music career.
Yeah, I'd like that. I'd like that. That'd be good. You don't do any crazy Vaughan challenges, like?
No. I always admired his ability to kind of put himself there and make challenges. I think I'm more of a quiet under the radar. I'll just I think I'm going to take up surfing, and then I do that. I think I'm going to take up drums, and then I do that. I think I recognized that my being in a band, I wasn't the front man.
Yeah,
I was the Svengali behind the scenes, and even founding a company or being part of companies, I quite like being the sort of the guy behind the scenes that's making things tick. And so, I don't have any public statements of what I want to get up to.
No, well, I think you are definitely the person that if a founder's listening to this now, right, and they are thinking about who they should they hire for employee 1, I think the theme is you hire someone that's been smart enough to understand that there's a problem there, that's connected the dots to say that I want to work at that problem, and that may not have the skills and experience that you need particularly for that job, but because they've been smart enough to connect all those previous 3 dots, give them a job and get the fuck out of their way, right? And look at your career since, right? It's just been evident that you've just grown and grown and grown and grown, and now you've got that ability where you're going to be able to consult to companies to be able to give it back, to tick all the things that give you, endorphin now, like helping companies, creating products, getting back to your roots and building something fast and hopefully not coding.
And I think the best people they're not obsessed over what they get paid. They're not obsessed over their job title or what their specific responsibilities are. They're just like, I think this is amazing and I want to be part of it.
Yeah.
What does it take? In fact, I think I even remember saying to Vaughan, like, what are your problems and your pain points? I think I can help with that, rather than this is what I want to do and this is how I think I can help.
Vaughan tells the story. I think he wanted to pay me to come and work at Vend, and he doesn't.
There was one video on that note. And, if anybody's watching this and they fucking love startups too and they want to get involved, I do think it is about just kind of like making yourself available and not overthinking too much about what it looks like or what the structure of it is, even if it's just like helping them for free to start with or providing them advice. And oftentimes, people with larger corporate backgrounds who maybe think that they haven't got the right skills or experience to apply for that job in a startup can actually add a lot. But often startups, they see risk on like big salaries and big hires, right? But they need a lot of help. And so the more you can help them, the more you can build that trust. It could lead to something, or maybe it doesn't, but at least it's a good way to start the journey. And there's one other video that we used to play a lot at Vend that people would always comment, I related to it. It was we talked about the first employee or the first follower. That guy, the crazy guy that's dancing in the festival, and he's by himself for about 30 seconds and you think he's nuts until one other person dances with him.
Yeah.
And then suddenly everybody dances with him. And it's like that first follower turns them from a nut job dancing by themselves into a festival into a movement.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah, I think that's me. Vaughan's no longer crazy. He's actually got a few people that believe in him. And, I was really proud of my contribution, I guess, in helping that company grow.
Awesome, man. Yeah, well, I think you've got a big legacy at Vend and Xero and on the ecosystem now, man. So thank you so much for coming in and sharing that. And
thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, man, it's been a pleasure. Let's finish our whiskey and go down for your formal dinner part of the evening now. Thank you very much to the Ice House for hosting us and putting on this dinner as well. Thanks so much, Nick. I could have kept chatting with Nick for hours, probably because there was whiskey involved in that podcast. But reality, because he's such a lovely guy and so many interesting stories. I really enjoyed actually understanding how he got into Vend, and it was interesting to hear Nick saying that he didn't know all the things and that he sometimes had imposter syndrome, because as someone that worked at Vend and used to walk around the office and see Nick, he always had all his shit together, and I always idolized him and thought he was such an amazing guy. And so I hope that this podcast is teaching us that, we're all trying to learn. We're all trying to do these amazing things, and we're trying to figure it all out together. And people just come onto the podcast and tell us that, we're all in the same boat. Doesn't matter what you think of us. Doesn't matter how we're perceived online or in person. And so I love that these conversations and stimulating these, and I hope you're enjoying them too. And so thanks for all our audience, whether it be online video or in audio, and people coming up to me in the street and telling me about it now. We get so many guests that are wanting to come onto the podcast, and so we're trying to get a hold of them all. And I love that everyone's subscribing. I love that it's blowing up, and so thank you so much. Pop some comments below and let us know why you like this episode. Let us know who you want to see next, and share it around, please. Please do. Let's get it across everyone into the ecosystem and beyond. And so until next time, thanks so much.
This podcast is produced by John Otaka from Empire Films.